Hello, my name is Maria Bezubova and you're at my channel Fertilizers Jazz. Here we talk about events, trends, technologies in the world of fertilizers and agriculture. Please subscribe to the channel, put like to this video, and let's jazz. Today I would like to come back to the topic which I think is very important for the future of fertilizers industry, because it is about significant increase of fertilizers consumption, as well as increase of fertilizers production with immense export opportunities. And it is all in the same geographical place. Of course, it is about the African market. Some time ago, I have discussed key trends in fertilizers market in Africa with Sebastian Duva from IFDC. Please watch this interesting interview if you still haven't done so. And today I would like to go deeper in details and also uncover the important layers of African fertilizers industry with a super interesting guest, prominent industry expert, Dr. Mounir Halim, founder and CEO of AFRIQOM. I am happy to welcome you, Mounir, and thank you very much for joining me today.
You're very welcome, Maria. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Mounir, obviously there is no doubt that Africa is the big thing and the next big thing in terms of agricultural development, which cannot be realized, of course, without development of fertilizers market. However, at the moment, consumption in the African markets lags significantly behind global averages. So my first question to you is, what are the key consumption trends in the African markets that you see actively developing?
Very interesting question to start with, Maria. And certainly, I couldn't agree more. Africa is in the minds of many. For different reasons, but certainly some refer to it as the final frontier. Certainly it is a major solution to food security in the future. Well, first of all, to treat its own food security, and then the food security of the world. You know, the population is growing, land, is limited, and the major potential is in Africa, that's for sure. And they are very complex markets in Africa. So many people tend to talk about Africa as one country. Africa is many, many countries, very diversified in terms of cultures, but certainly in terms of crop cultures and fertilizer consumption. However, it is undergoing a significant transformation, but also going through some volatility that can impact its trends. Certainly the main trend that you'd hear from us or from any presentations on the same topic is double growth that is seen in Africa. Now, we talk about Africa as a continent, but that double growth is coming from different countries. And we can dissect in a moment some countries, but those countries, and some of them that are showing or have shown major increase or double growth sustainable through 5 years, it is very possible and even likely in some cases where it's impacted by different reasons where we can see that consumption. All that hard work of development between private or governments or development agencies that disappears. And then we start the cycle again. And that's one of the major issues. However, the market remains a key market for many producers and traders in the world and in Africa. The main trend is an increased consumption of basic fertilizers. What I call basic fertilizers is the main commodity, if you like. That being said, is DAP, NPKs, urea, CAN, ammonium sulfate. So the main fertilizers. And then we can talk. So basically, we're seeing clearly increased, and we'll get to some countries' examples. We can see strong, generally over speaking. If you look at Africa, for those who are not familiar with the continent, if I was to summarize it based on what it's consuming, it's two products. It's urea and NPKs. That's the major things. Now, of course, it's a little bit, you do have needs for ammonium sulfate, CAN, sometimes ammonium nitrate, although sometimes it's for explosive grades. NPKs can be blend, can be compound, but majorly and can be divided into 50-50, maybe 60-40, but it's a simplified version. Now, the increase is organic, just based on the demand, but it's also, we cannot ignore all the efforts either done by government in terms of subsidies or smart subsidies or e-vouchers or encouragement, or depending on their strategies, but also development agencies. So it's a combination of many factors, but certainly we see a growing trend of the consumption. And of course, you know that we, in Africa, we are using way below the global average of fertilizer per hectare, kilograms per hectare rate. So that remains one of the drive and the target. And we'll revert to that in a sec. Now, apart from the main typical fertilizers, we also see more and more of adoption of specialty fertilizers. Now, this includes potentially sulfur-coated, clearly mostly is micronutrient-enriched fertilizers or slow release. But those, we see them particularly for not staple crops, but more of a cash crops or horticulture. Examples in Africa for cash crops would be cocoa, for example. We see it in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire, where the demand is specific for certain grades that are not your main grades that can be transported anywhere in the world. Now that's for specialty fertilizers. This is where they get a chance of developing more, but then it needs those environments and those cultures to develop in those countries to be able to see more use. Other things that can be considered as a potentially growing is liquid fertilizers, particularly for fertigation. But that is mostly focused on Morocco, Egypt, and South Africa, where we see more increasingly used in commercial agriculture, greenhouse farming, and large-scale irrigation farming. Example, in Morocco, I mentioned, there is a big government-led initiative where they're encouraging more irrigated agriculture. Any other high-tech nano-fertilizers or similar is nowhere. Some say it's in infancy. It's not even in infancy. It's very behind. But one not to forget, and that is really becoming more important now in the development of the continent, is the organic fertilizers, biofertilizers, organic fertilizers. Initially, we were the industry, but at least I can speak for myself, that we were not looking, like we deal with inorganic fertilizers, we deal in AFRIQOM with publishing market information, pricing data, and so on, inorganic fertilizers. But actually, for Africa to develop or to reach at least its targets or feed its populations, answer the question of food security, it needs a healthy soil. And to treat and to achieve a healthy soil, you need a combination of organic that will treat your soil, improve its health, which then, by consequence, will help higher yields using organic. So actually, organic and inorganic are two things that can go together rather than replace each other in the market. Because a healthy soil using organic fertilizer will give a higher yield, which will give the farmer a better yield, gets richer, believes in an organic fertilizer, will use more, and so on, the positive spiral will have. So that's, in a nutshell, the trend in Africa in terms of fertilizers.
I see. Thank you. Thank you very much. You already mentioned that, of course, Africa is very diverse. In Africa, we have 55 different countries, and of course, they are different in terms of consumption and in terms of strategies they take in terms of crops. Who is the leader, as per your understanding, in terms of this growth of fertilizer segment, and why is that? What are these countries doing differently versus others, so that maybe others can also do?
No, this is good because we look at data on a daily basis for our data boards and publications and so on. We have some very, very good examples. Some examples that are exciting with different solutions. But it shows persistence, commitment, engagement of different parties can result in what we are looking as the final frontier or the dream to see consumption growing. I mean, I could not start without mentioning Ethiopia. Ethiopia, with the state that it's basically a strong state-driven agricultural development strategies. So from the beginning, they had a commitment, they have no choice, and they followed it through. So they adopted crop and soil-specific fertilizer blend. So now they were using DAP and urea in the past. Urea continues to be used. They've changed from DAP to NPS, so that's what we call adoption of crop and soil specific fertilizer blends. This was supported by the initiative of the Agricultural Transformation Agency, ATA. But now, this is between brackets, we see NPS now reverting a little bit. Could be temporary, could be for long term. We don't know that, but DAP. However, what I'm trying to say is Ethiopia, within the space of 4 years, 5 years, it doubled its consumption. I mean, I have no doubt that when I'm going to share with you the number and the position of Ethiopia and African people will be surprised. Ethiopia now seeking to buy 2.4 million tons of fertilizers in clear tenders of urea and DAP. Now, this is very encouraging to see a country that moved from 600,000 tons, 700 to 2.4 million tons. And we're not talking in the space of 20 years, we're talking about 5 years, 6 years. And it's committed to that development. Now, in this case, there is one buyer, which is the Ethiopian government. And in many cases, many years before, for the NPs, was only Morocco that supplying urea with certain traders, with urea being a commodity available to traders. That formula, with a commitment of government, with a strategy to develop the agricultural sector, with committed supplier, such as OCP, to develop and support that crop and soil specific fertilizer, and naturally the willing of traders to go into that market, Ethiopians were able to achieve, and not only achieve that number, but also the status, most likely, of the largest consuming country if they achieve that this year, compared to South Africa. South Africa was number one for a long time. But not only that now, but because the tenders now of Ethiopia requires, well, its annual requirement will be 1 million tons of urea and 1.3 million tons of DAP. They are now competing in the world stage and attracting attention as far as China. But that's exciting to see Africa now playing in the global sphere. Other markets that are very strong in terms of positive experience, positive stories or business cases. Nigeria, there was a massive government investment program, like the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative, PFI, what we call, but together with a procurement vehicle like the NSIA, doing bulk procurement, which is the most beautiful thing about it, was one, to secure supply, before two, securing competitive pricing. Because many mistakes some procurement managers do, they think that we're just going to go and buy the cheapest fertilizer. In Nigeria, they were not looking at that. They were going to, first, we need to make sure we have a dedicated production capacity somewhere in Morocco and in Russia. And then, once they give that to a producer, they negotiate a competitive pricing. That initiative could really be a fantastic example for many other regions in the continent to learn from. But that certainly helped. Again, with other initiatives, there were explosion of new blending plants, leading to potentially lower costs because of that negotiation for NSIA, but also tailored NPK fertilizers. So Nigeria is a fantastic example. Other examples include Tanzania. We've just seen recently a move from, they used to do what we call BPS, a bulk procurement system, a tender, which already was smart in the sense they were not involved in any subsidy. They were talking to their importers, distributors, active players locally, and say how much demand. They declare what they decide, they work together, and let's say they needed a number. They need 50,000 tons of urea for the next 3 months. So the government, through this TFRA, which is the Tanzania Fertilizer Regulatory Authority, goes out with a tender. We need 50,000 ton urea. They get competitive offers. They select one. So they've gone into competitive sort of procurement tool, and then they add some margins, and then they give what we call the BPS price to these. That helps Tanzania keep growing. But after the hike in prices in 2022, they adopted subsidies and they followed it with payments, and that is making Tanzania get very close to 1 million ton consumption. So Africa, we have some very strong consuming countries, but they have a long way to go, and that's excellent. There are other examples like Morocco with their irrigation system, Ghana initially with the planting for food and jobs, but eventually there is a new program by the new government. So we've seen a recovery of Ghana's consumption again, and we are watching to see where that goes. This is in terms of the good examples that we have in Africa.
They're really, really
Some of them,
inspiring
not
stories.
all.
Really inspiring stories, and I hope that they will be duplicated very rapidly with other markets, of course. As we know, our fertilizers market is very global, and products are traveling all around the globe. That's the beauty of it, of the commodity market. And Africa, of course, as you mentioned, is one of the largest importers of fertilizers. So can you please explain, first of all, what is the share of the imports at all in the consumption, and what is produced domestically? And which are those producers, so let's say producing hubs, producing countries, that are the main suppliers of fertilizers to Africa? Does it develop somehow, or it is like a stable situation? How do you see this?
Luckily, now that we're talking now, it's developed. There are many, many changes, and they're very encouraging changes. But it is a little bit of mismatch. I cannot just tell you numbers here in terms of, because there is one compound product that is coming from Africa, and then there is blending all over the place that is also occurring. So there is some kind of production internally, but let's focus on compound, because this is what we're talking about, global trade, as we see products that are coming from outside the continent. Okay, so needless to say, there is the Moroccan giant, OCP, with its dedicated production capacity and strong numbers that is present in North Africa, so supplying Libya, supplying other countries in the north, West Africa, clearly, Southern Africa and Eastern Africa. So they're present everywhere. So that's an African producer. We have African production in North Africa, but that's not really coming to Africa in terms of Algerian and Egyptian and Libyan urea. We see from time to time it's more of an opportunistic trade rather than consistent or sustainable trade. So that is not counted here. We do have Nigeria, which is becoming the biggest hub of urea production in the continent. Now we have two companies head-to-head, more or less similar capacities, Indorama and Dangote fertilizer. Now, Indorama, there is more of Indorama's product goes to particularly West Africa, sometimes South Africa, and we've seen product going, or at least in tenders appearing in Ethiopia. Dangote less, comparatively with Indorama, more focused onto exports right now, mainly Latin America. But there are production, and I think this is more of a market situation. There is no I don't see any dedicated strategy from Dangote, for example, into African consumption. Maybe that will change with time or with their strategies. Then, of course, not to forget South Africa. So South Africa is a major production hub that is supporting up north the southern markets. But the exciting things, we've been hearing a lot of announcements, and we're looking for production in Africa. And following Nairobi's declaration that we need to produce more in Africa, we have seen one of exciting stories, and we took our clients for a conference in Zambia. UCF Zambia, a company in Zambia, is nearing, it's preparing, and it's almost ready to produce urea. And when I said almost ready producing urea, the urea plant is being developed now. We've seen it, we've followed it, and that's amazing. Now, even more exciting, there is no gas. It's not using gas, it's using coal, Chinese technology. The same company has also developed NPK steam granulation. So we see movement, and we just reported recently on Angola, also showing the first signs of a committed sort of program to develop urea. So there are some programs, and I'm talking about the compounds. I'm not talking about blending or distribution. There are many projects. We see OCP with many blending capacities that is developed or under development elsewhere. So there is production. There is a major production. We have raw materials in Africa. We have even production. Question is, should it be based in Morocco, for example, or based elsewhere? To me, it makes no sense, because you will still need logistics. As long as it's African, as long as it's competitive, I think it is there, and I think there will be more for it in the future.
I see, thank you. And how about distribution systems? Because well, we already touched a bit on that. The African markets, as from my understanding, they have a significant challenge in fertilizers consumption growth, specifically in their inland distribution systems. Because yes, there are a lot of potential existing and potential producers in Africa, but most of them are located not inland. And Africa is a large continent with long, way to the end consumers. So, do you see these distribution challenges somehow solving? And are there any distribution challenges at all?
Well, unfortunately, there are. Unfortunately, there are major ones. If you ask me about the major issues in the African success story, distribution and financing are one of the key things. And you mentioned something interesting because it adds the graveness of the distribution is the vast distances. So when you have vast distances involved, when a lot of these countries, Zambia, for example, Zambia is landlocked country. So vessels, let's say, coming from Morocco, from Russia, or from China. Imagine from Morocco north going all through Africa, and Africa is a huge one, going to Beira to go through, or going to more. So basically, if I refocus my thoughts, it's vast country with difficulties of the infrastructure. And infrastructure means government. And what says governments says or refers to follow-up governments. These infrastructural projects requires heavy investments. It requires long-term vision, and requires, not to forget, it's all about food security. So yes, again, I don't have the numbers because it varies from country to country in front of me, but I can tell you without a doubt that African farmers, specifically when we go to deep in landlocked countries, you could pick up the poorest farmer in the world, and you find him buying fertilizer at the most expensive price, and that's the reality. And some of it is due to the vast distances, so that means cost naturally. The inter-African trade is not like, for example, in European or to a degree in Latin American, although I'm not an expert in Latin America. They didn't have any other alternative to transport. In Europe, you have the Rhine, you have all these rivers that you can take all these cargoes from the big vessel that is coming and try to alter distribution. We don't have that in Africa, apart from the Nile and some of the Congo River. That's it. We don't have these developed or even natural waterways. And therefore, if there is no infrastructure, imagine the cost of transportation. Imagine the cost even to acquire these trucks. Imagine potentially if there is any corruption. Imagine the opportunistic approach if there are not enough trucks available. A guy that invested, how much he's going to ask if he's the only one is able to transport the fertilizer. So I'm going to the extreme cases, but it is what it is. So distribution is one of the, I hope to say it's one of the final hurdles that need to be developed, although others need to be improved. And as I mentioned, finance is another hurdle that we face. But infrastructure is a major one. We see improvement in ports. We see some train projects. We see China and we see US looking into investing. The future is bright. We just need to run fast.
Yeah, indeed. By the way, talking about the ports, just recently the news emerged that Namibian government has prohibited import and let's say transshipment of fertilizers that are not dedicated to its domestic market, if I understood correctly. And Namibia is quite a significant importer in terms of transshipment at the port which is located there. So how do you think it will influence the supply, and especially with such short notice that this was announced?
Well, it's interesting. You are very informed. You don't need me to explain to you the African markets. This is a very last.
Very fresh
this is a hot
news,
news.
yes, but
This is a hot news. So you are well informed. Listen, we don't know anything yet. We don't know anything for sure. We know, as in we as AFRICOM, we know why, although it's not clear, nor it's official. So it's based on exchange with market participants that are there. So this is the kind of regulations and policies. So we talked about distribution, we talked about finance, regulation policies in general. If they're not there, they will impede any development of agricultural sector. This one could be put as in a regulation policy, but we don't know if this is a temporary. Most people say it's a temporary approach to sort out certain things. What's the impact? Costs. Who's going to pay it? The farmers. So because Namibia vessels go through Walvis Bay, when Beira, as where it is today, is at its most at the end now, at the congested season. I mean, there's a big port in Beira that serves all that Beira corridor. Vessels were waiting for 60 days. You can add the maths. Somebody needs to pay for those damages. And you can be sure it's the farmer. So there is another element that adds to that cost structure. So I don't think this thing will last. So I don't think it's an example worth talking about. It's just an example that can impact, that can happen, that governments are behind, at least. I don't know who else, but it's government-driven policies that are really required. And typically, I expect you at the end, you ask me for what is the solution in your opinion. I don't know if you were going to ask that, but when you involve governments, or let's reformulate it. When you talk about Africa in general, about food security, we cannot ignore governments and public sector, because in many countries they are either monitoring or controlling or acting in the fertilizer sector. So they are present, and we've been talking a lot about public-private partnership, which I truly believe it's one of the key things. But I'm adding in a new thing. That's the first time I was just writing something that is slightly related, and I thought of a new thing. So I've never mentioned it to anyone. It's going to be mentioned in your channel first time. I really think to really drive. Hope I'm not jumping your plan to go into the solution. But really, what I think is what I call PPA, not private-public partnership anymore, but private-public-agency partnerships. So public, government, private, all the companies that are working very hard by their own way, trying to solve this potential. And then there are many development agencies, big foundations, big groups that are neither government or neither making private business, but they are there to help the development. I think we need an engine, a machine, and a track with all these three working together, country by country, because as we mentioned at the beginning, there are many different countries with different solutions. And certainly by putting all these together, the one element that is must avoid, which we've seen when we had a price explosion and so on, where African farmers they price out of the market, where we see donations. I think this tripartite approach, PPA, private-public agency partnership, to work out on different countries, but certainly on long-term solution. Subsidies is an example, for example. I mean, maybe for another session we can discuss the different items here, but with an exit strategy. That means you cannot come in and say, okay, I need to subsidize this market, like Tanzania we talked about, and leave it, because all it does, it helps you straight away, and then it stops. It even will stop increase in consumption. I've seen an example in Morocco where subsidy exists for a long time. So it's public-private agency partnership with programs created for different countries' dynamics, with a mid to long-term strategy, exit strategies. So I just came up to my mind when we were talking about the public policies and regulations. But yes, so that I think I answered the immediate thing, but it's much bigger thing. It's more the public.
It's a great idea that will definitely push forward, let's say, the whole process. Because indeed, when you have so many actors in one process, you need one joint engine, let's say, to push it forward, indeed. Mounir, as you already mentioned, Africa and its food system sustainability is in focus of all the international community, of course. And there are plenty of international organizations that dedicate a lot of financial, human, and all other resources to increase food supply stability. But if we talk specifically about fertilizer sector, how do you think this international financial support of the African farmers affects fertilizer consumption increase? Is it an important factor, or rather other institutional factors that you already explained are more important? What do you think?
It's equally important. I mean, one of the clearly biggest hurdles is finance at all levels, but particularly at the farmer level and agri-dealer level and retailer. This is a very big issue with the finance. The finance in general is a challenge, and that could be not only a session on its own, but probably a season on its own and talking different things. But finance, where does money get involved? Money gets involved either from investment. So you have somebody who wants to create a production plant, NPK blender, he thinks this market is growing, and that's difficult. Existing people that have their own, it's not easy to just to get. So first level of money is investment. Next one is for trade. So, and this is another bigger challenge. You have an existing importer, distributor. One is limited to which banks he gets, what kind of rates he gets, and be sure that they are facing difficult rates or terms compared to an importer in France or in Brazil, distributor. That's the second thing. So that's already, I mean, the investment is long term, and you need it so that when the market grows, finds and develops the economy and all the ecosystem around it. But today is importer, so trade finance. So that's difficult. Then you have, well, let's not just blame the outside for the lack of this. Like I mentioned, we're not really digging deep, and I'm happy to explain further later on. But also, you get high default rates in some of the supply contracts, which means the rate is higher if you want to borrow money and so on. But the money is there, and these systems work to a degree. There's still a lot of tuning required to streamline them to be able to mimic or beat even other European, American, Latin American, Asian markets. The other issue with the finance is what I started with, is when you go down the drain. And now we have foundations, we have banks, the African Development Bank, we have the IFC involved, we have the AFAP with bank, certainly AFDB with the AFFM. So there are a lot of initiatives of people that are keen on developing this sector. We need more of those. We need that PPA, remember, to involve and look at it at a country-wide, not at a region-wide or smaller countries, because you can go and do very, very successful programs. I would say from a guy thinking as a private investment, it's good to test. If it works, then bite the bullet, invest, go for the whole country, develop it, provide a system, work with the government, work with another private 1-2 producers, and we are back to that PPA. So you say, and now we're talking about a major foundation or major bank or consortium. I say, okay, we're going to show that it will work in this. This is how it's going to work to fund and provide finance to all these. Of course, I'm talking now with a bird's eye view. I mean, it's not as simple as that. But to me, that's the start. So you do that. And again, going back to that PPA. And yeah, so Then, of course, there are donations and subsidies where subsidies governments get support from World Bank or other financial institutions. Certainly, it's helping. Certainly, it helps. Example of Ethiopia. Ethiopia could not have done it on its own. Even if I remember Ethiopia back a few months ago, the government was facing extremely tough financial situation for the whole country, and we were worried about what was going to happen to the agricultural sector and the fertilizer sort of trade, but it survived and now moving forward, and that could not have happened without the financial structures supported by major institutions behind. So yes, certainly. But like I mentioned, that one is an example. It's like one buyer. And what do you do when you have a lot of buyers? And then what do you do when these buyers, let's say they're about 10, in Africa, we don't have hundreds, but these 10 will supply thousands of retailers. You need those retailers to be financially able, but also you need them to be financially literate and business literate and be able to pay their loans and so on. So it's complicated, but there's nothing not complicated in life. And yes, it's a key element, requires further tuning to streamline it and get more results together with other elements that everybody's trying to solve for Africa to go beyond the application rates it's using today.
Indeed. I want to thank you so much, Mounir. I think it was a super insightful and very interesting discussion.
Very welcome.
And as you mentioned, there are so many more questions uncovered. So I would be thrilled to host you again in the channel to discuss more of them sometime soon, hopefully.
Well, thank you, but it looks like it's me who's going to call you to find out about what's happening in Africa. I mean, you're coming up with the hottest subjects. But thank you, Maria. I appreciate it. Anytime.
And I want to wish you and AFRIQOM all the best. Of course, a lot of
you
personally, and a lot of good clients, a lot of interesting projects in 2025.
Thank you very much. And 25 starts with Cape Town. So we're taking major guys, I mean by guys is the industry, participants to Cape Town, 10, 12 February. We have Ma'adin. We're very humbled to have Ma'adin as host sponsor. We have Pure Fert, Nitron, Fertile Africa, but we're bringing some major things, more things to come. We'll announce it to people. But thank you, Maria.
Cool.
And Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. As usually, I will leave all credentials of Mounir and AFRIQOM in the comments. Please let me know in the comments which other questions related to the development of African market you would like me to answer and to discuss with Mounir, and I will be very glad to do so. I hope very soon when Mounir returns to Fertilizers Jazz. Please subscribe to the channel, put like to this video, and see you soon.